In 1958, Belmont Avenue was an unpaved road of low-quality housing on the edge of Nebraska's capital city, Lincoln. By the 25th of January, nobody had seen the Fugate family in number 924 for several days. There was a notice on the door reading, "Stay away, everybody is sick with the flu." When relatives called to see the family, 14-year-old Carol told them to go away. They called the police, who came and talked to Carol. She told them everyone was ill, and they went away satisfied. But when Carol's grandmother went back 2 days later and got no answer at all, she decided that somebody had to break in. And when at last relatives did, they found 3 bodies. They were Marion Bartlett, the 57-year-old night watchman who was Carol's stepfather, her mother Velda, who was 20 years younger than him and had divorced Carol's father 4 years before in order to marry Marion. And even more horrifying, the body of their 2-year-old daughter, Betty Jean, stabbed and beaten to death. The police were told that Carol's boyfriend, Charlie Starkweather, had called on the family some days earlier, and he was a known troublemaker. A 17-year-old who fancied himself as a rebel in the James Dean mold, Charlie was fascinated by guns and crime. His parents had 7 other children to cope with, and Charlie ran wild. Among his exploits was racing stolen cars on this track. On the 21st, Charlie had set off for Carol's home with a gun, apparently to shoot rabbits with her father. So the police moved into action, putting out an all-stations call to find Charlie Starkweather. They searched for Carol's body, but there was no sign of it. Then came a sighting. Carol was with Charlie in his car, and they appeared to be heading south on Route 2 towards the nearby village of Bennett. Had she been kidnapped, or was she an accomplice? Or was she just a kid who was doing as she was told by her boyfriend? They ended up in Bennett on the 27th of January. Charlie was heading for the house of a family friend, but his car got stuck in the mud. They walked the rest of the way to August Mayer's house. When they got there, Charlie shot him and stole $100, another gun, and some clothes. By the time the police checked out the farm, the couple were long gone. In the wash house, covered with a blanket, they found 70-year-old Mayer. He had been shot in the head at close range. Local citizens formed a posse and joined in the manhunt. But the couple had headed back to Lincoln in a car Charlie had hijacked after asking for a lift. The driver and his girlfriend were found riddled with bullets in an abandoned storm cellar, with the door jammed tight over them. The bodies were identified as Robert Jensen, a 17-year-old high school student who lay at the bottom of the storm cellar steps with 6 bullet wounds in the back of his head around his left ear. And 16-year-old Carol King, who lay on top of him half naked. She had been shot and stabbed. While the posse combed the countryside, Charlie and Carol went back to Lincoln, checking whether the bodies of Carol's family had been found. When he saw police around the house, Charlie drove on, ending up at one of the town's biggest homes on 24th Street. Inside, he lay in wait for the owner, C. Lauer Ward. When he came home, Charlie murdered him. Clara Ward tried to phone the police, but Charlie stabbed her in the back with his hunting knife. Then the maid, Lillian Fenkel, was tied up and knifed to death. The discovery of the 3 bodies caused a panic. Lincoln was sealed off for a house-to-house search. Gun stores sold out 5 times over. The $1,000 reward was offered. The local sheriff appealed for help in the capture of the rampaging Charles Starkweather.
Well, since discovering the last 3 bodies, which makes a total of 9 that we know of so far, Mayor Martin and I have made an appeal for all adjoining counties, including Omaha, to send all available help they can to Lincoln. It is our opinion that the car is still in this vicinity. We know he has been for the last 3 days, and we want to cover Lincoln block to block.
But now, driving towards Packard, Charlie and Carol were heading towards Wyoming and the Badlands. Armed guards were stationed at local schools in Lincoln, but terror soon spread throughout the Great Plain and Rocky Mountain states. No one knew where the teenage killer would strike next. The National Guard was called out, roadblocks set up, and every home barricaded. Citizens formed vigilante squads and searched every possible hiding place by day and night. As they sped across the state line, Charlie heard on the radio that the police were looking for the Packard he was driving. It was Merle Collison's bad luck to take a nap in his Buick as the couple drove along Highway 20. When he wouldn't get out of his car, Charlie shot at him through the window. Then as Collison opened the door, he was killed by another 7 shots. But Charlie had trouble starting the car. The handbrake had jammed. When a deputy sheriff pulled up, he jumped back into the powerful Packard and drove off alone. He sped through the city of Douglas at up to 120 miles an hour, now with police cars on his tail, leaving Carol behind, pleading with the police for help. Finally, bullets smashed his window. Hit on the ear by flying glass, he pulled up. The police had to fire warning shots at the ground in front of Charlie before he would surrender. But at last, to the delight of the pursuing press, Charles Starkweather was in jail after 10 slayings in 8 days. Charlie admitted to 8 killings, claiming that they were in self-defense. He confessed to murdering Carol's family, saying that they had accused him of getting her pregnant. A quarrel had flared up, and her stepfather had attacked Charlie with a hammer. Charlie had shot him, and when Velda came at him with a knife, he had first shot her and then hit her with the rifle butt as she went down. The baby was crying, so he threw a kitchen knife at her to shut her up. Then he finished her off with a blow to the head and stabbed her father several times to make sure he was dead. He also admitted to a murder which had been baffling the police, the killing of Robert Colvert, a gas station attendant 2 months before. Charlie had robbed the station of just over $100 and driven Colvert to an isolated spot where he shot him. On the 29th of January, Charlie was charged with murdering Merle Collison in Wyoming, but the governor was only too pleased to extradite him back to Nebraska, and no trial was ever held. On a cell wall, he wrote that Carol had killed 2 of the women, but the girl denied this, protesting that she was just one of his victims as well. Carol claimed that she was tricked into helping him because Charlie had told her that her mother and stepfather were being held hostage. The proof was that when they were caught, she had run to the deputy sheriff, crying, "Take me to the police." But the state of Nebraska believed that she was Charlie's willing partner in crime, not an innocent captive. It was decided to put both of them on trial for murder in the 1st degree. They elected to be tried separately, and Charlie's trial for the murder of Robert Jensen began in Lincoln on the 5th of May, 1958. His claim that he had acted in self-defense was seriously undermined by testimony that all the bullets were found in the boy's back. His defense team called 3 psychiatrists, but none of them felt able to testify that he was legally insane. Among some of his generation, Charlie was elevated to the status of cult hero. As he had hoped, they saw him as a James Dean character, a misunderstood teenage rebel. But the jury was not impressed, and on the 23rd of May they found him guilty. The sentence, death. Now the state encouraged Charlie to give evidence against Carol. He claimed she had egged him on to murder her parents. While he cleaned up afterwards, she watched TV. He hadn't tied her up, and they had stayed in the house for 5 days. When their car had stuck in the mud and snow, she had eagerly helped him ransack August Mayer's house. And when they hijacked Robert Jensen's car, It was Carol, Charlie claimed, who had emptied the high school student's wallet. It was she who had jealously attacked Carol King because she thought Charlie had been having sex with her. Finally, she knifed and shot the girl, while he was away trying to extricate their car. At C. Lau Ward's house, she had packed herself a suitcase of stolen clothes. She had then stabbed Clara Ward, sprinkling perfume to hide the smell of blood, and then knifed the maid, Lillian Fenkel. Carol denied all this, insisting that all she did was to alert Charlie when Ward drove up. He had then taken him to the cellar to shoot him, and it was Charlie who had killed the women. She swore she hadn't touched them. But he insisted that when he left the maid, she was alive, and that he had stabbed Mrs. Ward only once. In the face of this blow, her attorneys decided to use their client's trump card, her youthful charm. Not yet 15, she would be the youngest girl in the United States ever to be tried for first-degree murder. This interview on a local television station was an extraordinary prelude to an extraordinary trial. But putting her on television didn't go as well as her lawyers had hoped. As seen here, the police had cropped her hair of its ponytail and dressed her not in jeans, but in a tight blouse and long skirt, which made her appear 10 years older. And nervousness made her seem sharp and hard as the interviewer questioned her.
Why do you think he would even implicate you in that if you didn't have anything at all to do with it? Why do you think he'd want to implicate you?
Well, by now I'm sure he hates me for running away. He's trying to make it look like I'm just still doing things.
Had you gone with him for quite a while?
Yes, I'd went with him a year before, and then I told him I didn't want to see him again, but he came back. And after that Sunday, I went with him, and then I kept telling him to leave. And that Sunday, I told him to leave, and I told him I didn't ever want to see him again.
Why? What had brought you to this conclusion? Why didn't you want to go with him anymore?
I think he's crazy.
Do you still think that?
Yes, I do.
But many viewers wondered whether this had really been her feeling during the week of the murders.
Did you ever break down and cry and beg Charlie to let you go or anything like that?
Yes, I cried all the way.
And he just wouldn't let you out of the car at all?
Carol Fugate's trial for being an accomplice to murder and robbery began on the 27th of October. Years later, she recalled her bewilderment.
During my whole trial, I was not totally aware of what was going on.
A string of witnesses testified that she had helped Starkweather in the killings, and the press was hostile. Nor were the jury of 5 women and 7 men strictly neutral. One of them later recalled that the day before the trial, he had bet a friend $1 that she got the electric chair.
One of them, I don't remember which one, whether it was the prosecutor or the defense, but one of them I said I thought she'd ought to sit in Charlie's lap and save the double expense.
Charlie Starkweather left death row to bear witness against her. "I don't care if she lives or dies," he shrugged. He testified that she had threatened to blow her mother's brains out, that she had plenty of opportunity to get away if she had wanted, and that she had held a gun on Carol King, and that she had taken Robert Jensen's billfold. In rebuttal, her attorney pleaded that she was a frightened child who saw the terrible things that happened to people who defied Charlie Starkweather. The jury was out for 24 hours while Carol waited with her surviving family, who rallied round and supported her throughout her arrest and trial. The jury's first decision was that she should not be executed. There was pity for her. But whatever compassion the jury may have felt, they had to follow the facts.
She was guilty. They didn't ask us why.
They found her guilty of murder while in the perpetration of a robbery. In Nebraska, the jury decides the sentence too. They chose life imprisonment. Carol cried out, "No, I'd rather be executed." "Is there any reason why sentence should not be pronounced at this time?" Judge Harry Spencer asked her. "Yes," she replied, "I'm not guilty." The judge pronounced, "You are sentenced to imprisonment at the State Reformatory at York for the period of your natural life, and you are ordered to pay the costs of the prosecution." She was taken away to face the added punishment of 222 days in solitary confinement. As she was still only 15 years old, she could not, by law, enter the general prison population. So she had to spend the first 8 months all alone in the prison.
There was days when I would just, cry out of loneliness, for another human being. Well, I used to sit by my window, because my window looked out onto to our gate, and I used to think, they're going to come and they're going to find out. They know that I didn't. And I'd wait and I'd wait and I'd watch out the window, and every time a car would come in, I'd just kind of hold my breath. And I used to just sit and just, look out and, cry and everything. And then this, I think when it really dawned on me that I knew I wasn't leaving, that it was going to be permanent, was the day that I was fingerprinted. And they fingerprint you, and then they take your what they call prison term mugshot. And I think after this, I really felt, that, this is it. I mean, you're not leaving. You're going to stay here. And I think maybe this is when I sort of started to adjust to the idea that I would be here. And that day I cried a lot.
Charlie Starkweather was fighting for his life. He had been encouraged to think that by helping convict Carol Ann, he would win himself a reprieve. He was disappointed. In April 1959, he fired his attorney and represented himself at a clemency hearing, claiming he had found God. That won him a short reprieve and a few weeks more of life, but on the 24th of June, he was executed in the electric chair. At York, Carol found a harsh regime. No talking was allowed except at meals and recreation. No makeup was permitted. Radios were banned. Little attempt was made at rehabilitation in the late 1950s. Inmates could have school lessons, but for only 45 minutes 3 times a week. So it took Carol Ann 10 years just to finish the 8th grade and complete her high school education. The reformatory's only teacher was Mrs. Iris Sadoris.
And some way or other, I just tried to instill into her a quieter voice, a nicer walk, and things that I thought would help her, because I had no idea that Carol would be with us as long as she was.
This was the problem which increasingly began to trouble people as Carol's sentence dragged on. However terrible the crime of which she had been convicted, she had been very young and impressionable. The regime at York made little allowance for preparing her for the possibility of eventual release. Inmates were woken at 5:45 a.m. The food was often inedible. Their clothes were dowdy, ill-fitting, rarely washed, and smelt strongly of disinfectant. In daylight hours, prisoners were not allowed on their beds. Even if they felt ill, they had to lie on the concrete floor until nightfall. Those who broke the rules were placed in solitary confinement for weeks at a time, where the diet was confined to tea and bread. Inmates were even forbidden to smile. But as the years passed and the 15-year-old prisoner matured, attitudes towards the role of prisons were also changing. Eight years passed before she first left the prison. It was for a judicial review. She was refused a new trial. By 1970, she was the longest-serving inhabitant, staff or prisoner. Conditions were gradually relaxed, but sometimes she still despaired.
This is it. You are forever and ever and ever doomed, to a penitentiary.
But in 1971, the authorities began to prepare her for the possibility of eventual release. A new reform regime at the prison now allowed trustees to go into the nearby town of York. Carol became a regular at the bowling alley, but she was still not allowed on work release because of her life sentence. She was grateful when the town also offered the use of its new indoor pool, where she swam every week.
Maybe I can't just, walk the streets free or something, but they're willing to at least, let me come down for a small part of the time and be part of their community.
Then she was allowed to work in the local church creche. Some mothers had initial reservations.
Someone from there. And then I heard the name Carol, and I was dumbfounded because we lived here at the time that the things happened that she was put in there for. And I remember barring my door at that time, and I was scared to death because my children, older children, were young then.
But the confidence of the authorities seemed justified. She had always been a model prisoner, and the new prison governor, J.J. Exon, sounded optimistic about the possibility of her rehabilitation.
And I feel quite sure that sometime in the future, possibly the immediate future, we can put Carol Ann Fugate back into society, where we think that she will have an excellent opportunity to become a valuable working member of our Nebraska community.
But there was still a strong lobby in Nebraska which opposed her release, however much she might express remorse at what had happened.
I really wish that there was something I could do. I wish it was a magic word I could say, or a magic phrase, or something that would, that could bring these people back. I'm sorry. I'm deeply sorry it happened.
But on the 20th of June, 1976, Carol Fugate was finally released on parole. She continued to protest her innocence and even took a lie detector test in 1983, which suggested that she was telling the truth. But the next day, a poll showed that the majority of Nebraskans were still convinced that she had accompanied Charlie Starkweather willingly during his appalling rampage.